and welcome back to the Healthy and Happy podcast series. I am joined with a special guest here today, Dr. Ammara Khalid. Did I say it right?
Yep.
And she is joining us from Chicago and is co-founder of Core. What's the full name of your practice?
It's Center of Relational Empowerment.
Okay. And she is a super impressive guest, and I'm super excited for our talk here today. Do you mind giving a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. My name's Dr. Ammara Khalid, and I co-own the practice Core in Chicago with my partner, Dr. Amanda Rios, and we specialize in family and couples therapy, as well as diversity and multicultural issues. We have a training program, and we do psychological testing. We do individual, family, group, and couples therapy. We also do workshops and consultation and provide supervision for our trainees.
Dr. Khalid has a very diverse background and has really been able to, it sounds like she's been able to establish really an ideal kind of practice where they're able to provide really good wraparound services and cover a lot of bases for the individuals and families that they work with. And today we're going to talk just a little bit about some of the challenges that are faced during this time of year, some of the challenges that families and individuals experienced with some of the stresses around the holidays. We're also living in a time, these past 2 years have wreaked havoc on a lot of us individually and as families in dealing with the effects of the pandemic. So what are some of the things that you're noticing and some tips in terms of how to deal with some of the stresses and strains?
Yeah, it's been such a challenging year, and depending on your family makeup, it really will shift how you approach the holidays. So I think, some of the challenges that families with young kids are facing, for example, because the vaccine hasn't been rolled out yet for a lot of young children, has been to protect them, and then feeling kind of isolated and cut off because they're not able to attend certain holiday parties or see families or make plans to travel because the little ones would be at risk. Whereas with families with older kids, maybe people are getting together, but there's conflict in the family when, Uncle so-and-so won't get the vaccine, right, and gung-ho about it. And so how do you have these conversations with each other, and how do you approach this holiday time and the idea of coming together and seeing each other after so long? I mean, some people haven't seen their families for 2 years now, and we're really hoping, okay, this will be the trip where we finally make it out to see grandma, or we make it out to, be together. And so there's just so much going on. And I think, even without the pandemic being an issue, holidays can be a challenging time because it brings up a lot of stuff, whether it's around establishing healthy boundaries, or whether it's around eating or substance use. The holidays can be a trigger for a lot of people, especially when you've had relationships that have been cut off in your family of origin, or have been dysfunctional or harmful in any way. There needs to be a lot of thoughtfulness and preparation in how long are you going to be there for? What are your support systems going to look like? What are your coping strategies? Have you talked to your therapist about what your triggers are? Are you able to recognize them? So being able to really navigate those relationships and maintain a sense of feeling grounded and centered, even when you're around family members that may trigger you, or, loosely we call it family drama, but if we look at the way of dysfunction in families, especially when there's been a history of trauma, history of substance abuse, it can be very tricky to navigate that. And then you add all the, drama from the pandemic into the mix. So it's just a lot for people to carry. And I think people are burnt out, they're overwhelmed. Work has been so stressful, and being at home trying to manage school and virtual learning and Zoom meetings, and not really feeling like the holiday is providing respite from that, I think has been a theme that I've been coming across.
Yeah, you bring up several really good points. One is an aspect of just how systems work. And one of the things that I've seen really consistently across the years is that holidays and really anytime we're spending more time with our loved ones, it tends to exacerbate whatever's going on. And so if things are good, it tends to lead to more goodness. And if things are stressful, or if there's been trauma or different things, then it exacerbates whatever that is. And part of the reason for that is that the way systems function, once a system is set up, there are rules that apply to not only to the system in general, but also to individual people, and there are roles that you're supposed to play. And so even if you haven't been daily interacting with the system, sometimes for years, when you get plugged back into that system, suddenly instead of being a 35-year-old adult, you're being treated like a 16-year-old kid. And you're expected to follow those rules, and you're treated the same way. And so it can be really that homeostasis, and homeostasis is system maintenance. Whatever the norm is, a system exerts a lot of pressure and tactics to try to maintain that homeostatic balance. And so it's a time of year where a lot of that gets triggered and brought back up because of how systems function.
Right. And roles are so important to understand, because if you were the golden child in your family, the expectations and the rules are very different for you versus if you were sort of the black sheep or the scapegoat in the family, and how you're treated, how people talk to you, is also going to change. So really understanding those family dynamics gives us some insight into how what your needs are and how to navigate that time with family. Because like you said, you can just go back to that childlike state, and either you end up fighting or fleeing or freezing.
Whatever you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, one also really cool thing about systems is that they are changeable, and the norm can be reset and readjusted. As you work with people, how do you help them change the rules, or kind of buck the system, if you will, to establish a more healthy equilibrium?
I think the first step is just to value your own time and value yourself. I think some of my clients come from families where they have such low expectations of others and such high expectations of themselves, and being able to really see that can be a painful process, but an important one, because you have to treat yourself well. And if you don't believe that you deserve to be treated well, then others won't treat you well either. So recognizing that your time is precious, and understanding that it's okay for you to have healthy boundaries, have support systems, that you deserve that, right? Even just on the basic level, that's so important, because you don't want to feel like tearing you down is the norm. And unfortunately, with some of my clients, that's the norm in their families. And they've become so used to it, they don't even notice it. It's like this automatic process. So just becoming aware of that, I think, is the first step. And with the holidays, there's a lot of pressures around, oh, these are our traditions for the holidays, or this is what culturally is expected. And if you don't follow that, that's something that's wrong with you, or you're being selfish. And so what if you come from a family that is toxic and those relationships are abusive? At the end of the day, you have to be your biggest advocate and supporter. So really taking the time to give yourself permission, I think is is a great way to kind of think about it.
Yeah.
Another step is to know your triggers and anticipate them. Sometimes with couples, I've used the strategy of almost having like a code word
Yeah.
where, if something doesn't sit right and you need to walk away, have a code word with somebody and take a break, go to the bathroom even.
Right.
Just
It
five
doesn't matter what it
minutes.
is. It could be,
Yeah.
truly, it could be,
Step
exactly
away.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take a break because again, so many of these interactions are overwhelming and your nervous system is so active
Activated.
that you don't really feel like there's a way out. And even a small thing like taking a 5-minute break, doing some deep breathing in the bathroom can kind of help reset that.
Yeah. Good. Really, really good point there. Um, I think two things that I really see in conjunction with what you're talking about. One is starting by giving yourself permission, recognizing, and I think a lot of times we get so wrapped up in our cultural beliefs or expectations, or even religious beliefs, or family pressures, or whatever, that we don't even stop to think or to question, is this a right or wrong, or is this just the way we've always done it?
Right.
And a lot of times people feel like they're violating morals and values if they break a tradition, or they don't. And there are lots of things, as I work with people, from seeing things from, like, what a man is supposed to do, or what, the firstborn son is supposed to do, or the youngest daughter is supposed to do, that are not these objective right or wrongs. They're cultural norms, and maybe even just familial norms, that, and if they're not working, it's okay to change that. It's
Right.
and giving yourself permission to do that, and then also prepping yourself, and making sure that you're giving yourself adequate resources to be able to change. Holidays are such a great opportunity, because you really can't change a system without being in the system.
Exactly.
And so being able to take advantage of these opportunities to be back together again, and to be spending time, if you work with a therapist, or work with yourself, or a coach, or your partner, whoever, get a plan of how you want to engage differently, and then making sure that you're exercising, you're taking a 5-minute break, you're taking a nap, you're sleeping well, you're eating well, you're giving yourself the resources to be able to execute on your plan as you engage and spend time with people. Then these can be really great moments to help rewire the rules of a system.
Exactly. And just having those boundaries in place. For example, I've had clients say, well, I'm expected to spend the night at the house. I can't get an Airbnb, or I can't stay
Right.
at a hotel. That wouldn't be acceptable. Well, what are
Why
your
not?
Yeah. And what if you make that case for yourself? And yes, your family may not understand it, but don't get caught up in the trap of having to explain and get their validation for it to be okay. You can validate your own needs and recognize that what you want is just as important. And it's not about hurting their feelings, but it's just about you needing to take care of yourself. If you decide your limit is, I'm not going to spend more than 2 hours or 3 hours, and I don't want to do this full day extravaganza, that's okay.
Or
Make it,
3-day extravaganza.
yeah. Just say, oh, I'm not feeling well, or, I think I need some rest right now, and step away. And it's perfectly okay to have those boundaries and express them in a gentle way, and maintain sort of, your self-care while you're doing this.
Yeah, and most of the time, if you do communicate why you're doing something in a loving way, people respond to that. One of the greatest things about people, and about systems, again, is that most of the time healthy works.
Yes.
When we communicate well, when we interact well, most of the time people respond to healthy. And so how you have those conversations, I think is also really important. And I think, you know, there's lots and lots that goes into how to communicate effectively. But I think one kind of simple technique that people can do is just focusing on feelings. You know,
Mhm.
we interpret everything. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, if I look away, you're going to assign a meaning to that. Is there somebody out his window? Is he, you know, what's he doing? We interpret everything that happens. And so if we provide an interpretation, hey, I'm not staying at the hotel because I don't love you. I'm not staying at the hotel because I don't want to spend time with you. I've just noticed that if I don't take time to fill back up, or if my kids don't sleep well, then our interactions end up not being good interactions anyway. And I want the time that we have together to be good time. And
Mhm.
so I'm not doing this because I don't want to be with you. I'm doing this because I want the time that we are together to be good time.
Right. And there still may be pushback. And I tell clients
Exactly.
all the time that it takes practice to say no. It
Oh,
takes
absolutely.
practice to set limits, especially when your family isn't used to you doing that. If they're used to you accommodating to all of their needs and expectations, then yeah, it will take practice. And I think, you know,
You're
clients
breaking the
are like,
rules.
well, I've built myself up and I've given myself this pep talk, and I was really thinking that once I set this limit or set this boundary, it would be accepted. Well, yeah, in an ideal world, sure, but really it takes a lot of practice. And so you're going to have to say no again and again. And it's not that, you know, you're not being heard. Your family just isn't used to you standing up for
Yeah,
yourself.
you're
So,
you're breaking the rules. That's not how the system functions. And I love the word practice,
yes.
because you're not supposed to be good at something when
Mhm.
you first start doing it.
Yeah.
You're not good at riding a bike the first time you get in the saddle. You know, you're not good at drawing a picture or singing a
Mhm.
song or shooting a basket or anything. Almost anything takes practice. And all too often we expect ourselves to be able to be really good at relationships or boundaries or even sex or anything else. We have this
Right.
weird set of expectations that we're just supposed to know how to do family.
Yeah.
And
And that's why I really enjoy role playing in session with my clients, because I will be that mother or that
yeah,
parent or that sibling, and we role play and we practice. And, you know, it gives clients a sense of understanding about, like, okay, how do I fall into these traps? And, you know, how does XYZ person bait me? And how can I avoid these traps? Because you have to have that awareness and insight. Um, and standing up for yourself takes time, it takes courage, it takes practice.
it totally does. And that's one thing that I would recommend to those of you that are listening to practice. So many times I'll be talking to somebody in a session and they'll be like, yeah, I totally get it. And then I'll say, okay, so let's practice. And then when you go to actually try to say it, those neural pathways don't exist yet. And so you've got to be able to practice and give yourself a chance to succeed.
Yeah.
Um, you hit on another really important thing that I'd like to talk about for a few minutes, and that's I think a really common conundrum that people find themselves in, where maybe their needs are different than their kids' needs, um, or other important people's needs, you know. And so, but a lot of times as parents, we find ourselves in situations where, you know, we might want to really stay at the party and continue to interact, and our kids might be at the end of their rope and need to go to bed, or our kids might want to be, you know, or it might be like you mentioned, that with the pandemic, we need to protect our kids, and we're worried about them getting COVID or getting sick or whatever, and we're starved for interaction. And
Yeah.
so, you know, we find ourselves in these situations where, you know, what's good for one member of the family may not be what's good for another.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people find themselves in those kinds of situations now, and struggling to know how to manage all of that.
One of the things I think the pandemic taught us was about risk tolerance and how everyone sort of falls on the spectrum with that. Initially what it was about, even going to get groceries, who's comfortable going to get groceries, who
Right.
isn't. And so, and as the pandemic progressed, people decided, okay, is it safer for me to stay at home and grieve that loss of connection, or is that connection important enough to me to take the risk and maybe meet people outdoors, and having to balance and navigate that. And similarly with the holidays, trying to cope with different risk tolerance levels. Some
And be
people
respectful of
it's
that.
small, yeah. And understanding that with each person, there needs to be some flexibility, some discussion. And so having those expectations clearly set from the onset, as much as possible, can really help. Because I think if you're not sure what kind of environment you're walking into, some people say, masks required on the invitation, but then you get to the party and everyone is eating and drinking and there's no mask in sight.
Nobody's wearing a mask. Yeah.
So it's really important to have those conversations, especially with whoever's hosting, what the protocol is. And then being upfront and saying, I'm comfortable with this and not this. And so, can we find compromise?
Yeah. And I, one of the things that I would also recommend you listeners think about, if you find yourself being really threatened and reactive to somebody having a different opinion than yours, then it's probably more an issue of your level of differentiation than it is they're having the wrong point of view. Because the healthier we are, the less threatened we are by somebody thinking something different. And when we are when we're terrified and feel really threatened by somebody having a different point of view than ours, then that level of reactivity typically isn't super healthy.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether to talk a little more about that or not, because I think that, I don't know, that variable of self-differentiation. I think one of the most important things with this, with the holidays, with the pandemic, with vaccines and masks and all of these variables that are part of our lives that weren't necessarily before, is really comes down to respect and consideration of other people.
Treating them with grace.
Yes. Yeah. And not expecting people to be perfect, right? Because a lot of times I think we get really reactive when somebody else is behaving in an unhealthy way, and we have to remember that we're all practicing how to try to be healthy human beings.
I think one of the unfortunate things that we've seen happen is that in families where there is a history of toxic relationships, the pandemic has almost been sort of weaponized, I would say,
Yeah.
and used to just recreate old patterns, old unhealthy dynamics. And it's like you can use the pandemic as an excuse to some extent, but then it's being used to punish people, or play the blame game. Oh, of course you got COVID, and you didn't listen, and you weren't. And it's just it's bringing up a lot of old wounds for people, because it's it's a way of manipulating the situation or using it, especially for people that have some sort of narcissistic traits, or borderline traits, or just those deep attachment issues where it becomes so much bigger than it needs to be. And even if it's not as severe as narcissistic or borderline, even with just, I would say, emotional immaturity, right? Dealing with emotionally immature people, it just creates such a dysfunction in the system.
It does. And one of the things that I say to people a lot too is you can't expect normal, healthy behavior from somebody who isn't healthy.
Yeah.
And if you know that your mom or your father-in-law or everybody has that brother or sister-in-law, it seems like
Yeah.
that is predictably going to be difficult. If you know that is the case, then having a healthy expectation of their dysfunction can help keep you from reacting emotionally as you go and interact with them.
Yeah. And I tell clients that there's really no point in coming up with some brilliant argument that's going to shift their perspective. I think people should respond with sort of a slippery response, like, something vague and non-committal. And it just means that you'll get minimal feedback, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be this mission that you're on to change someone's mind and, help them see the light.
Right. No, and especially if these are relationships and people that you're going to see, once or twice or three times a year, then just having those brief hours be positive, or at least not be huge drains, is a win. And you don't need to take on the challenge or responsibility to try to set them straight, because frankly, those relationships probably aren't that important. Now, if it's, if it's your partner or one of your kids or maybe a parent, then that relationship might merit more work. But if it's not, then just don't get sucked in.
Exactly. Exactly. And the funny thing is, so many people come back from these trips and say, man, I really need a vacation from my vacation.
Right, exactly.
And it's like, so we talk a lot about preparing you for this trip or for this interaction, but also we should talk about how can you come back and not go back straight into work, or just have some time towards the tail end of your time off or something, and use that time to replenish, recharge, reboot, instead of just going back to your day-to-day routine, and have that separation, almost like, pre-treatment, post-treatment.
Right. So many of us, get home at 10 o'clock Sunday night and are back to work, at 8 o'clock Monday morning, and there's no buffer to kind of regroup. You have had the I don't know, the blessing, the benefit or opportunity of having a pretty diverse background, lived multiple places. How do you feel like that has impacted your ability to relate and to do your job?
I think one of the unique things about my experience was that I grew up going to international schools, and that meant that we had children from all over the world coming together. And, as the new kid, you often have to navigate that challenge of, okay, who do I make friends with? And how do I connect with people? And growing up, I mean, if I'm being honest, I was so envious of people that grew up in the same town their whole lives, went to the same school. I was like, that must be so cool. You got to have your friends throughout middle school and high school. And, I mean, for me, especially when I was younger, there was no email or internet. So
right.
Stay in touch with people. Goodbye, man, goodbye forever. And that was that. But what I realized over time is that as much as we can celebrate our differences, we can also celebrate our similarities. And that really guides my work with people. That really helps me to connect with people that, again, are similar and different, because I don't make the assumption that just because I share a similar cultural background or ethnic background with someone, that we'll have the same experiences. There's no one way to be South Asian. There's no one way to be Pakistani. And my experience as a TCK, or a third culture kid, as we call ourselves in sort of the expat community, was that, once you find ways of connecting with people, you really see how similar we all are. And it's not so much about cultural differences as it is about like our families and our systems and the roles that we play.
Yeah. And at the core of it all, we all want the same things. And you know, everybody has two basic needs, and that is to a sense of love and belonging,
Mhm.
and self-worth. We want to feel like we matter, and we want to feel like we're emotionally safe,
Yeah.
that we have someplace, and that drives most of what we do. And I think, you know, one of the things that I think is really helpful to keep in mind is that there's almost always an understandable and pretty good reason for why people do what they do or why they think what they think. Very, very seldom is there not some sort of goodness, at least in the intent, behind somebody's thoughts or behaviors. And I think if you can keep that in mind and try to say, okay, you know, where is he coming from, or where is she coming from? And because almost always, if we can understand that, it's typically an understandable position or point of view that they're coming from.
Right. Right. And as long as we are taking the time to slow down and step back and not jump in with our own automatic reactions or assumptions, again, that is something that also takes practice. Because our
Absolutely.
thoughts are so quick, emotions are so quick. It takes practice to slow down and almost become that observer for ourselves and take, you know, a look at what it is that we're feeling and trying to come from a place that is more centered and calm and compassionate rather than driven by, you know, the parts of ourselves that are sort of polarized or extreme in nature and want to protect us from feeling hurt or pain or loss,
Yes.
shame.
Yeah, I've got to jump on that, because one of the things that you mentioned in their email is that a lot of your work comes from internal family systems theory.
Yes, yes.
And most of you listening may not know what internal family systems theory is, but essentially, I think in the most basic terms, internal family systems theory is a theory that postulates or operates under the assumption that internally we work just there's a system inside us that works just like an external system, and so there are different parts of us that are battling or working off of different agendas.
Mhm.
And the more you can be aware, what was that Inside Out, that
Yes,
movie Inside Out,
but
several years ago. I don't know if it was a Pixar or what it was, but it's a really good graphical representation of the fact that we're complicated human beings. We're complicated systems just in and of ourselves, and we don't want or feel one thing. There's
Mhm.
part of us that wants X, and another part of us that wants Y, and by being aware of what those different factions inside us are kind of vying for, you can take more control of that, and you can decide, yeah, I want this part of me to have the reins right now, or you know what, no, I know that this part of me is vying for this, but actually this is the direction that I want to go in.
And what I really love about this theory is that at the core is this idea that all of us have a self that is wise, that is compassionate, and that can lead.
Yeah,
And that's a very empowering idea because
super
as a
empowering.
therapist, I don't want clients to feel like I'm the expert in the room. I want them to trust their own gut instinct. And usually it works out best for them when they do that. So they have to trust that they have this inner voice that will guide them and be objective and be centered and not be triggered by all the different things that are happening around them. And so we work hard to really separate these parts from that sense of self. And once they're able to access that, it's a beautiful thing because you see so much growth and enlightenment with clients.
It's a game changer.
Yeah.
And recognizing that you can plug into that
Mhm.
wise part of you, and just make sure that those different parts of us are are trying to do something good, and they just need direction.
There's no bad parts. They're just trying to protect our, ourselves, and they employ strategies that may have worked at a certain time. But we change, we grow. And so how do we learn to shift and grow with that? And I tell clients this all the time. The goal here is not to get rid of this part or, stop listening to it, but maybe it can help you in a different way than it used to before.
And there may be a time in the future again that particular part may be more useful again.
Absolutely.
It's I think it's a really empowering. Another thing that I say a lot is that our brains will go where we direct them if we will direct them.
Yes.
But our brains are going to work, and if we're not directing them, then they're going to do their best. They're going to do their best to cope. They're going to do their best to deal with life. But we have the potential and the opportunity to direct them if we choose to take advantage of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I also wanted to, I don't know if it was your post, but I think it was on your site with some really good information that I also wanted to share with the listeners. And that was 6 ways to set healthy boundaries with family. One was value yourself and your time. Give yourself permission to do what's best for you. Know your triggers and anticipate them. Be clear about your needs and communicate them. Practice saying no, and make a list of coping strategies, which you actually already hit, I think, almost every one of those just in our conversation. But those are 6 really good bullet points to keep in mind.
Yeah.
You want to elaborate on?
Well, right now we're seeing so much come up for our clients. So a lot of our posts and videos on Instagram at core_psych have been geared towards helping you navigate boundaries, different tips and strategies that our clients have found helpful. There's a lot of resources that we also recommend. I think as a family therapist, 2 books that are my favorite go-tos are Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson. I cannot tell you how many of my clients have found that helpful. They'll buy copies for their siblings. They're like, you have to read this. And another one is It Didn't Start With You, How Inherited Trauma Shapes Our Families by Mark Wolin. And that's another really enlightening book looking at epigenetics and how certain traumas are passed down from one generation to the next. And if you don't know your family history, you may not even know where some of your symptoms are coming from. But it requires you to go digging for information and asking some questions and really understanding how patterns repeat across generations.
Super powerful. And I think that's one of the biggest messages of hope that I would try to instill, that I do try to instill, and hope that listeners can grab onto, which is that you're not stuck.
Right.
There are so many great resources, and we have so much good science about what it takes to bring about change. And just because the things that you've tried in the past haven't worked up to this point does not mean that you should throw in the towel, because there is good help and there are good techniques, and change is absolutely possible. And if you find yourself feeling like that's not the case, you're wrong, because you can change, and don't give up. Just shift gears. More of the same gets you more of the same. And if what you've tried or what you're currently trying isn't working, then shift gears and find something else, because there is a way to be happy. There is a way to have either the relationship that you're in, or getting out of a bad relationship, and there's a way to have your life work.
Yeah. And for your listeners out there, I think this is the right time because we're kind of entering a new year, a new season. So use that as an opportunity, not to necessarily set resolutions or anything like that, but just set intentions for yourself. And think about, if you're not in therapy already, think about seeing a therapist, maybe a family therapist, who can help you navigate some of the different topics that we talked about today.
Yeah, absolutely. I've really enjoyed our time together. And the stuff that, and if you didn't hear that, and we'll post it as well, but core_psych
Yes,
is
on Instagram.
yeah, is their Instagram, and there's lots of really good stuff on there. I really appreciate your time, and I've enjoyed visiting with you. Any kind of closing remarks or thoughts that you'd like to share?
I think what you were saying about hope made me think about a client who, I saw for years and came from a very difficult family system and did a lot of really great work on herself, and improved some of her relationships with, first of all, herself and some other people, but her her feeling of despair wouldn't quite leave her because she said, I've done all this work, but my family hasn't changed. And, I feel like we haven't really, been able to see the kind of change that I wanted to. And we explored that. And I think a lot of people that do this work come in thinking that maybe they can change their families. And they have to understand that that responsibility is not on them, right? That just because you're starting to see change and growth in yourself, you may not see that in your family and in the people around you. But that should serve as a reminder that everyone at the end of the day is responsible for their own change and growth. And some people just have limitations and they may or may not be capable of that change. And that's okay. And you can grieve that, you can mourn that, but it's important to accept that and not expect those people to change and grow with you because they just may be in a different space, and that's okay.
That's a really good point. And one of the things that you want to keep in mind, if as you embark on the process of change, is that that there is a chance that if your partner or family members are not engaged in the change process with you, there's a chance that you might outgrow or
Yeah.
out healthy that
Mhm.
relationship. And yet there comes a point a lot of times where you have to decide whether or not you're willing to stay in dysfunction, or whether your quest for improvement and health is more important.
Right.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time,
Thank you for
and
having me.
yeah, you've shared wonderful things, and I really I really appreciate it.
Thank you.